almost at every point from 1997 to 2018, one of them was working on G.I. Joe. So I think this is going to be an awesome kind of walkthrough of what that looks like. That's about us, but you guys know enough about us. That's not why you're here. So we'll go ahead. I'll introduce Daryl first. So Daryl had 19 years at Hasbro, starting at 01, including Vice President Global Brand Manager. But really started, for those that don't know, before Daryl went to Hasbro, he was already a big G.I. Joe collector. He published a fantastic book on Joe, and then got to go to the company where his influence then really helped protect the brand as we know and love it through his career.
Maybe protect.
Maybe
destroy.
Nah. And then Brian started as an intern in 1996, working directly with John Boyce, another legendary Hasbro designer, and then moved in and out of the brand as well, but worked on a lot of the eras that we have a lot of fondness for, especially the 97, 98 releases, which we're going to talk about, and occasionally came back to the brand repeatedly until finally retired. So, what we really want to get into here, these are all the eras that these two gentlemen covered. So when you look at this from a historical retrospective concept, we pretty much have the whole thing covered. There is not something that happened in G.I. Joe that either directly or indirectly Daryl and Brian didn't get to touch. And so this is pretty much as I'm going to do talking. We're going to facilitate some questions, but we're here to hear about G.I. Joe history and Hasbro from these two gentlemen here. So, that said, Brian, I'm going to let you start talking us through how we get back to G.I. Joe in 97.
So this is great. I love this. Of course, this is very early. This is pitch model when we first, Vin DeLeva, you guys know Vinny. He was the marketing person at the time. To get the team of, we were relaunching, he had the idea to relaunch Joe as an exclusive line. He said, you know, there's so much demand. He's like, let's give the fans what we want, but what can we do? So what kind of figures can we find? So at the time, figures were in the US and they were in India, and they were in Brazil. So we had to go around searching for tools and put together some compelling sets. So we wanted to tell some stories. So here's some real early samples of what we thought they could be. And of course, version 6 Destro over here, and some fun ones. But yeah, it was really Vinny driving this, that was pushing for this. He had a vision for it, and John and I were, you know, happy to comply.
Do you want to talk about how some of those early figures came, like the designs came to be, about where you obtained the originals to repaint?
You know, I think being young designers, I think we found them wherever we could find them. We would get them from swap meets and the store, like collector stores, like, you know, like secondary market, but it wasn't very easy. So we had the archives. So people were like, oh, Hasbro's the best archives, and maybe there was some missing. They got redecoed. And people were like, how could you destroy that? And it's like, well, we were doing our job. You know, we had to, you know, there were tools. But there was also the infamous display cases that are missing a few figures that we kind of took out and never replaced. We said we would, but we just never got to it. But yeah, we scrounged. And a lot of them we never were able to find. So a lot of them, like, we had goals in the original, like, said, oh, that's not what came out in the Pitch 3-pack. And a lot of it was because the tool was destroyed, it was a missing part. It was just some kind of catastrophe, or we couldn't move on.
And some of the ones, so we're here on, also sponsored by Heritage on behalf of here, to talk about some of the items that are in the auction. Some of the items in the auction are the ones shown in this picture here, and those were the ones you couldn't find the figures for. So you painted them up as if you wanted to do them in packs, but then you actually couldn't find the tools anywhere.
So when we set the vision, of course, it was, we couldn't just put the old figures and just reship. It was, what could we do today? You know, we had better spray masks, we had more spray ups, we could do washes, we could do some molding techniques. So yeah, these were hand painted for the pitch samples on the left.
Do you want to talk us through the infamous
Let's right into that one?
Let's get to it.
Okay, I didn't know if it was on another slide. So everyone is familiar with Destro, and one of the existing two is in auction right now.
You can call it by the name that everyone else calls it.
I don't call it, it's version 6. It was version 6 on the line. It was Destro V6. It was always Destro V6 and it had product number. We were really busy, John and I, when we were in the heat of these 3 packs. So it was nice and we were pumping them out. And, we were responsible for doing our drawings and our deco guides. John got lazy. John's my best friend, and love him to death, but he totally got lazy here, and he brought him to Steve, and he said, Steve, just make him cool, make him hot, and like you would do. And so Johnny, and Steve's like, oh yeah, no deco guides, and I'll show him. And it was 2 figures. So Roadblock came back, and so Roadblock has never made it past that room, where he came back and neon orange and glitter. It has a lightning bolt, and it was disco Roadblock. And this was, leopard print Destro, because he was like, well, what would camouflage be? It would be like fur. And he moved it into mess with John. And John's like, the Roadblock is stupid. And he put it on his desk. And then this one, he's like, oh, I love this. Running with it. And he shipped it. He ran, turned it over to, he did his, proper guides then, and he shipped it. And it went to China Herald, and it got made in pre-production. And then it came in. We got the baggie in, and we got 2 samples.
2 carded samples.
2 carded samples.
And then a bag of
There was 8 loose ones. And then Vinny saw it. Vinny was not happy. Vinny was like, what is this? This is not Destro. Change it. What can we do? So he wanted us to remove the figure. So I took out some of them. I blacked out some of them. We kept on the house desk, and we sent that over that night. And we got a piece 1 running change. So yeah, it's like it was a couple of years when we told the story and stuff. I think it was like in Lee's magazine, or somehow the story got out. And it was just, we were just doing our jobs and having fun. And John really loved this figure. And it just took a life of its own, like the whole mystery of it. But yeah, so it came in and it was changed before green kegs. It still had the pink launcher. Like the pink launcher was still shipped with it.
Yeah, but it matched, the figure inside matched the packaging art. Did the packaging art change too?
So Wayne was doing the artwork at the time. Wayne Blatchley, I think, was responsible for that one.
Wow, that was a fast change.
Yeah. Well, it's easy when you just black it. Yeah. So questions. So it was fun. We knew it was really cool.
And for those who know, so you mentioned, I think, John's last name. Johnny Boyce was Brian's really your best buddy at Hasbro. They started when they were kids together. And John did so many products.
Our first 6 years we shared an office, and we were together forever.
And then John recently passed away at the beginning of this year, just tragically, like too young and too young to actually, come out and be like on a panel and tell his stories too. So in a way, Brian,
I gotta take care of John's stories.
You're telling John, John's stories.
He can't tell you about Roadblock, but it goes in the picture.
Get it out there.
Yeah. He's still, it's in his.
People would like to know.
Yeah, and then I have, and you have it, the one is in the auction for Destro Command. I have it.
Yeah, so there are only 2. That's important to talk about. The 3 packs.
It was hugged across the room.
So the 3 packs that were sent to Hasbro, right? There were 2 carded package ones. They have no date stamp because they were for approval.
Yeah.
Pre-production for approval, and there's only 2 of those that exist. So. Very good.
So here's, I love that. So these are layouts. When when the test shots come in, we had to approve. So before the inner blister is made, we have to approve the layout that it all fits. So here's the accessories, right? Because it's in a 3-pack, it's not in the traditional coffin there. We had to make sure that they fit. So it's a lot of like Scotch tape and how do you want it to look? Will it fit in the blister? Will it draft? So that's what this is. These are approved to be made the inner blister. They always fall apart, so these are really, you don't find many of these because they always come off.
And then not quite as famous as the Destro figure, we have some other figures that didn't quite come out from the same time period. You want to verify the year on this?
Yeah, so this was, I had done for part of the 3 figures that came with the headquarters that never came out. It was like the end of the line. It was like a higher price line. The line was kind of like, okay, we'll wait and see on this one. And I really love these decos. Like this one, I had a lot of fun because it was like modern and relevant, and I thought it was cool, and it just got killed. And
to be clear, that was supposed to be the 83 headquarters.
yes, right? It was the first one.
At Desert Colored headquarters.
Yes, it was tan. I don't know if I still have a headquarters, but yeah, it was that color.
And then you guys tried to,
I think it was
explore the
awesome.
idea of salvaging this as a 3-pack as well, right?
Yeah, I think it was, can we save it? And then it was kind of the transition off the 3-packs to eventually what came out as the 2-packs. So, yeah.
Right. And so that takes us to, after
But I really love these figures.
after 98, everybody knows we don't have new product for 99. We think maybe some is still shipping.
Yeah, product is still on the shelves.
Right. And then you guys moved to the 2-packs in 2000.
Yep.
So we can start talking about some of these mysteries.
Yes, this is one of my, I think it's one of the concept bin models, we call it, where it's constantly looking, exploring at new figures, new decos, and what can we find, and like sometimes we're ahead, like we're planning for this because we think we have the tool, we think we have all the parts, what can we do, and sometimes it just doesn't materialize, like, because we're working so far ahead as designers, like 9 months to 12 months ahead, you make more than what you ship. And this is, I think, a cash in.
That also applies to these, right?
Yeah, these are these are hand painted, really concept they were intended, but we didn't find the tools.
It's cool designs. I wish they came out. They're so cool.
Firefly.
Huh.
I love it.
This was, a privilege. I think when I got, I got to carry these over the finish line. I think I to say, these were done before my time, right before I got there. But then Vinny was so passionate about animals. He's like, we gotta get them. We gotta get them. Collectors deserve these. And so we redecoed them, and the first 3 came out, TV. Right?
Yep.
And then we had always intended for the next wave to come out, and we made it as far as pre-production of the second wave, and I wish they all. It was I love working on these.
And that takes us to
Okay.
where Daryl joins the brand.
So then I came to Hasbro in 2001, and like Sam talked about, I've been a collector my whole life. Even as a kid, exhibited collector tendencies. I would curate my 12-inch Joe collection, put all the rifles out, take pictures of them. I was a collector long before, and so my first toy book was a 12-inch GI Joe toy book. And that one right back there, the collectible GI Joe. And I had been applying to work. It was my dream to work at Hasbro, and specifically on GI Joe. And I applied for like 8 years. I don't know if I ever told you this. When they were in Cincinnati, the old Kenner offices.
You applied, but it's like, yeah, everyone applies. Like,
Yeah.
who's the new guy?
Everyone's applying. But Vinny at Hasbro gave me great advice. He took the time. I just sent him like a cold letter, and he took the time to call me. We talked for like half an hour. He says, if you're serious with it, it sounds like you should be in marketing. Go get marketing experience. And I did a career pivot, and I did exactly what he said. Yeah, I was in grad school working on a PhD in neuroscience, which I didn't finish. But I said I really want to be in toys, and Vinny gave me the advice. So Vinny DeLeva, I owe my career to Vinny, really. But anyway, long story short, I tried to get into Hasbro for 8 years. I finally got a chance. A publishing company asked me if I would do a book on 12-inch GI Joe, which I collected very passionately. I said, sure, I could write a book for you. And that really helped open a lot of doors. And notably, Alan Hassenfeld at Hasbro, when I interviewed, they closed the Cincinnati office to bring everything over to Rhode Island after Star Wars Episode 1. It was a financial disaster. They closed that office. So many people from Cincinnati didn't make the transition to Rhode Island. It was bad. A lot of people, sorry, you were on you worked on the line. The expectations for Star Wars Episode 1 were too high, and that is a cautionary tale on its own. But that book actually helped me. So I had to interview. I was the only director, I think, that ever had to interview with Alan Hassenfeld. So you had Alan, the CEO of the company, but he wanted to make sure that G.I. Joe would be in good hands. So I remember I had to go in and interview with Alan, and he had a copy of the book, and we just talked about, I said how I love G.I. Joe. It was the ultimate storytelling brand. My childhood was filled with memories of playing with G.I. Joe. And I think I told Alan then, but I definitely told, later I heard about it. I said, and the goal would be to relaunch the Real American Hero brand. And I always called it Joe versus Cobra. So, and that's what became the first line we did was Joe versus Cobra. And I called it that simply because I felt it gave that line context. But anyway, so I got hired at Hasbro, and I remember very vividly our first line review with Alan to relaunch what became the Joe versus Cobra saga. It was in 2001. It would have been probably summer. I had a few months under my belt working with my design counterparts. And then we put together this great presentation, how, it's time for this iconic brand to come back. We were going to do it 3 3/4 scale. We'd have new figures, new vehicles, and everything. And we told Alan, typically when you do a toy line, you want 18 to 24 months to really get it right, to just get everything right, do your research and just really get all your marketing materials together. And Alan, so we presented to Alan and all the executives in our presentation tank, we called it. And we said, and Alan, we are going to relaunch G.I. Joe versus Cobra in fall 2003. And that would have given us about 18 months to develop the line and then ship it. So we thought this was great. We thought it was a home run. Alan he was almost incensed. He reached over and he pounded the table. I'm seriously, he went like this. No. You will launch in fall 2002. So he loved it, and he wanted us to accelerate our timeline a year earlier than we planned. So that put us into immediate, we were way behind the 8 ball to get everything done. So that first year of G.I. Joe, I am not proud of it. The whole T-crotch thing, I do have to take a lot of blame for that, being on the team that launched Joe versus Cobra. But in fairness, I think I was the only one on the team in that room that we decided. I was totally against it. I thought we should have done O-ring figures, but they ended up T-crotch figures. But that's a story for another day. But I'd say the whole spirit of the relaunch of Joe versus Cobra, it was to infuse the brand with the feeling of an epic story right from the start. We wanted to do the 2-packs, picking up the 2-packs that Brian and his team did, but having a battle in every box. That's what we said. We want a battle in every box so kids can play with it right out of the gate. And every year we wanted a different theme, so everything felt new and fresh. Everything had a big marketing story. We always thought about what's our TV moment that we're going to put on TV and really get kids to do. And that first year, it was Sound Attack, and it was so stupid, but it worked. We had that. We did our first animated commercial, and I think it was Duke who said, "Let's hit him with Sound Attack," and put a big gun, back in the tank. And it was perfect.
Licensed sound right before Glow in the Dark.
Yeah, right. So it worked, and it got us off to a great start. But immediately we knew on Joe vs. Cobra we had a problem. And that's why Sam has this figure up here. So the first figures that we came out with were the T-Crotch figures. And we got immediate feedback when we showed this at conventions. We heard from the fans. This was a bad move for the brand. You wanted us to course correct. We had a lot of new sculpts. Some of the sculpts were cool, but the figures are not what we wanted. So we immediately pivoted, and we had this young designer named Dwight Stahl. And you may have heard of Dwight. He heads up Marvel Legends design. Dwight worked his butt off to course correct the line. And what we did was we moved away from the T-Crotch and brought back O-rings. But not all the figures were exactly the way we wanted them. Some of them were like this stalker, still kind of like bulky out of proportion, but on the O-ring body. This is kind of an intermediate design to me. Later in the line, as we did Vala versus Venom, Spy Troops first and Vala versus Venom, I think we corrected and did some amazing figures. But it was a gradual kind of course correction, but it was all due to feedback. But it was also due to, it's one of my great regrets is that first step out of the door I knew was going to be troubling, and we worked very hard to kind of correct out of it. Eventually, trying to recreate all the sculpts that we did in T-Crotch O-rings. I don't think we got to all of them, but we brought back some O-rings. So at the same time, like if you can't make new O-rings, then you can get Johnny Boyce, the legendary designer, to use our library to make great, retail exclusives and things like this. And so John is the one who did the Toys R Us 6-packs. He did a lot. He didn't do the comic packs. Dwight did the comic packs. But Dwight did. But John Boyce did all those Toys R Us packs. So John was a master working with Brian before that to really do impactful decos. And so he did a lot of great stuff. This is one of the lines that I really wish we could have shipped, because these designs are some of my favorite that John ever worked on. It was designed for Walmart. We had these 2-packs, and they were going to include a nylon parachute in there. And ultimately, I think we had a safety issue with the nylon. QA put the kibosh on the nylon parachute, so those figures couldn't ship. But a few factory-produced deco samples exist, and they're absolutely amazing. I love these figures. So one of the really fun things about working on this period of Joe was we were given a lot of latitude in storytelling. And the way these stories came about, so in 2002 it was Joe versus Cobra. That's very simple. We had a gimmick Sound Attack. That was the TV item. The next year was Spy Troops. And I remember creating the idea for Spy Troops one year on vacation at Comic-Con. My kids and wife were at the pool. I was at my sister-in-law's house, and I was just sitting there trying to think, like, what are we going to do for G.I. Joe for next year? What's our story? And I came up with the idea of Spy Troops. The next year, I came up with the idea of Vala versus Venom. Vala versus Venom was kind of a deep line inspired by the idea of a new Super Cobra villain infused with DNA, kind of like Serpentor, but kind of taken to the next level. And that's where we created Venomous Maximus and the whole idea of, animal mutations and things like that. So some of the vehicle designs from this time, I think, were real hit and miss, but there were some all-stars too in the line. So.
Well, and I don't know that we necessarily have a good slide to talk about it. If you want to hit it here, the following Valor versus Venom, the line that didn't come. Do you want to talk about what was supposed to be Rise of the Robots?
Yeah.
A bit, where you got that idea?
Yep. And so I'll give you. So I was so excited about our follow-up line. And Valor versus Venom was doing very well. I will say this: the follow-up line was going to be Rise of the Robots. That was our internal working name. And it was inspired by several different things from my childhood. The Droid Factory from Star Wars was hands down probably my favorite, 3 3/4 toy ever. And I really wanted that buildable droid aspect to come back in a toy line. And so I thought, let's do it in G.I. Joe. In G.I. Joe, we have the bats. The bats are these amazing things, but they're always like the servant of Cobra. They just go out onto the battlefield and do their job. And what if they became autonomous and rebelled, against Cobra? I thought it would be great to have G.I. Joe and Cobra team up to fight an army of crazy recombinable bats. That was the idea behind Rise of the Robots. That would have become the story. It's also the name is taken from a video game, a very obscure fighting game that came out in the early 90s called Rise of the Robots, which is all about these cool robots. So unfortunately, G.I. Joe was killed. So in fall of 2004, our president, Brian Goldner, was completely confused by the G.I. Joe product line. It had become very difficult to present to retail. It had become very difficult even to present to our management. People didn't understand it, and I'll tell you why. So we had 3 3/4 for kids, 3 3/4 for fans, 12-inch Joe realistic military that didn't have any fantasy. We had 12-inch Joe for collectors because we had the 40th anniversary, and then we had 12-inch Joe for kids that was Joe versus Cobra. Oh, and kids bought military too. So imagine presenting this to retail and say you need all your SKUs because they cover all these bases. Brian Goldner just said, stop. There's too many things. There's no coherent storyline here. I want a complete restart. And so even though Valor versus Venom was doing well and gaining momentum, and we were working on a TV series for Rise of the Robots with Gonzo, that eventually became Sigma 6. So Sigma 6 took the development work we had, but it was a completely fresh start to the line, and we wiped away all the 12-inch and 3 3/4. I thought it was a great time for me to make a change too, so I went over to the Star Wars team. So like the Joe team needed
to the dark side, baby.
the Joe team, and that's when I started working with Brian. So the Joe team needed fresh blood to do a fresh start, and I needed a fresh start too. So that's how we kind of wiped away everything. Elements of the Rise of the Robots product line did get released. I think it's some amazing stuff. I really wish we could have given you guys more of what that vision was. I really wanted to especially do a lot more combinable robots. Eventually that became the Build-A-Droid line in Star Wars. The same thing carried over. That's why in 2008 we launched that in Star Wars, because I wanted to see that Build-A-Droid component, but it started here.
Brian, do you want to? Yes. Do you want to talk to those? Snake has to do.
I think there's more Daryl.
So classified 6-inch Joe was not the first time that we looked at doing a 6-inch Joe line. And so you guys know down at the booth, Patrick, I think you have a couple examples from, I think, probably a 2008 iteration, a 6-inch line that you actually worked on.
Yeah, I designed that.
So this was the first attempt, though. This was probably inspired by the Toy Biz toys. This was done in a 6-month period between the time that I left the brand from the Rise of the Robots line and Sigma 6 was really born in its conception. They were looking at, what are new things we could do, and so they looked at doing these 6-inch figures. But these were, obviously they didn't go further than just these, hard copies.
We do get some more to report.
with your
So in the the direct to consumer line, or DTC, took a lot of those Rise of the Robots elements, and there were some concepts that were on the drawing board planned for later waves. And this Hardmaster, it breaks my heart it never got released, because Dwight Stahl was working on the comic packs at the time, and he took everything that was developed and made sure it got released. But this didn't make the cut. It didn't make the cut. And it really kills me, because I read every G.I. Joe comic. I made notes in the journal of which characters we could do, and Hardmaster was at the top of my list. Hardmaster and October Guard were the two things at the top of my list. We got out the October Guard, but this one we couldn't get it out, and it kills me. But it's one of my favorite figures that never got released.
Yeah, October Guard was great, but that was the first time we got greenlit to do new heads. That was huge for John and I, when the O-Ray figures to bring in new heads.
Yeah, so then we move on to the 25th anniversary. You want to talk about seeing those 5-packs?
So I had about 4 tours of duty over G.I. Joe. So I moved off to Star Wars, but then they asked me to take G.I. Joe back over again after a couple years, because G.I. Joe is a tough brand. If you're not really passionate about it, it's tough in Hasbro, because there was no TV show going. The movie, there really weren't movies then. It was just a toy line. That's very difficult to present, and be in the crosshairs of management a lot for that. So when I was asked to take G.I. Joe over again, really for my second tour of duty, it was a brief one, but it was at the end of Sigma 6. Sigma 6 was struggling. It was a very expensive toy line to produce. Sales were just marginal, and the show wasn't really helping it. So, but designer John Morton had developed these packs. Do you remember those packs that had the stands, the Cobra and Joe stands that had the sounds? They were the first 25th figure, those multi-packs. And I looked at those when I came onto the brand. I said, these are amazing. They were about to hit retail. I said, this is the future. Like, what they designed was the future. And we cut Sigma 6 right there and said, let's put all our effort into the 3 3/4 line. And that's where these were born. But it's just, that decision had to be made. And, John basically created the future with the 3 3/4 figure. So he should get a lot of credit for his vision on that.
And we go to the movie.
So my second tour of duty, so I come back on Joe. This was it was so good to be back. I got to come back to Transformers and G.I. Joe as the Wounded Operating brands, and I got to work on the movie launches, and it was just a lot of fun. I mean, it was just, I like it. So I think this is that last wave, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
This was, I think it's in here because they're beautiful. At this time, we were very lucky to have such an amazing team assembled at this time. This is, Proctor, Franks, Bella, Vera, forgetting people.
Warden too.
John Warden.
These are all stars.
Yeah, so this was the best. It was such a good Joe team. It was Aranya. It was a great team at this time. So they just really were so passionate about the brand that they just put in so much effort into making these the best looking Joe figures they could ever sculpt. And they made the accessories, the gear, every single thing that went into this. It was just a great team. They love Joe. And that's where you have, when you start getting people that grew up with it, designers, and then they go and put this into it, it's fantastic.
I think you guys were saying that among fans, these are
Yeah, and I think, a lot of folks in the room would probably agree, unless you're an original run purist, the Pursuit of Cobra line, especially with John Burton who's doing a lot of work there, is a very well regarded era of G.I. Joe, especially with the design aesthetic.
probably the apex of everything, coming together. The creative design, the amount of accessories packed in. They all had toy play features too. They didn't leave that behind. It's ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, there hasn't been an era like that, since. I think they had a lot of freedom. You guys had a lot of freedom, and you were out of the movie window, so you could
That was out. Yeah, I think it'd be in there. I mean, the team had a lot of play to do great stuff. That's one of the great things about being able to work on such a huge IP. But when the company owns an IP, it's great being a designer. It is great to be able to work on something where you're writing, it's your sandbox, and you're telling your stories. You're like a caretaker, and it's just, like I said, it's always been a privilege. That's why it's like, getting to go back to Joe is always good, because, it's fun working on licensed brands, but Joe is always special.
Right, and that takes us back to the second movie, one we all prefer.
So the second movie, so I'm realizing that we tag teamed in and out on Joe. So
I'm at the end here.
yeah, so right, we worked together just a little bit here. So I was asked to take over G.I. Joe the third time after the Rise of Cobra movie became internally, like the people on Rise of Cobra on the marketing side wanted to change. So I took over Joe again. And then this was the lead up, and basically I stayed on G.I. Joe all the way through to the end. So Retaliation was fun, but our hands were really tied because Rise of Cobra, the company did a lot of product for Rise of Cobra, like so many figures, very ambitious line. But it was a little bit like Star Wars Episode 1. It was maybe too big for the market at the time. There was kind of a product overhang, which means a lot of product got cleared out. They released just too much. So when Retaliation came, we had very few items to work with. Not a lot of resources. So the line was pretty tight. We had our designers we had Warden, I think, Logan Libera.
Logan and Warden were the heavy hitters.
Yeah, on the line. So, they did a lot of fun stuff, and this was
friends, right?
Yeah, we might have had Andrew too. That's right. And one of the things, there was actually a lot of great designs. I think the team did a really good job with what we had to work with, trying to invent a lot of stuff to get it instilled in the movie. But John Warden really poured his heart and soul into the things he did. And this is one item never released, right? But has its history actually, I think, with you. You had a
So John Warden mysteriously got access to the West Coast Navy SEAL dive locker.
How does that happen?
They must have knew somebody.
Must have known somebody, and was allowed to get in there and handle all of the gear and take photos. And that is where the origin of this unfortunately unreleased figure comes from.
So these are the funny stories. Designers get to go on all these amazing experiences, and marketers typically don't. I did.
I know.
I didn't go to the set. Logan was embedded on the set.
So yeah, that was part of it. I think it's
Training with Dwayne Johnson every morning, and
like I said,
and Warden's going to Navy SEAL firing ranges. Did you say firing ranges too?
Firing range.
Yeah, but I saw someone fall off a rope. Yep. But no one rang the bell, and we need to fire.
How come you don't invite the marketing guys in these cool?
What's the car?
There's other reasons.
There's other reasons. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I can't say that in the 30 years that I worked in and out on these brands, it's like, it was the people. It was just working with some of the best people and so talented. And like I said, toys are made by people that love storytelling. And, it's just fun. So yeah, we did get treated really well as designers.
So the Night Landing Raft unfortunately came at the very end of Retaliation, and it's one of those things that got cut, those last week. And then one of the highlights actually in my time working there was to work with the club. So here's the thing, you guys know this all too well, but after, you could even say from Retaliation on, you could see Hasbro upper management's attitude towards G.I. Joe. Didn't trust the brand, the movies weren't sparking, they weren't selling a lot of toys. You could say it was an incredible mismatch between, you know, what the producers thought would be a great movie and actually what inspires kids and their dads to and moms to play G.I. Joe together. I think there was a big mismatch between what's on the screen and what's really expected to catalyze. But Hasbro's management's attitude was, we don't trust G.I. Joe. We're not going to give you a lot of resources. You can have, you know, just a few resources. You can run it at retail as long as it's got to pay its own way. And eventually, Toys R Us became like our lifeblood. You know, Toys R Us really wanted the line, and
They started with
they
so
said,
much
yeah,
of it.
they were a great partner.
Great partner.
You know, they had the real estate that they could bring everything in. But even then, we had limited resources that we could do ourselves internally, right? Some of those Toys R Us lines were just a handful of items that we stretched as far as you could possibly stretch it. But one thing that did not have the same fetters that we did was the club. So the club, over time, Brian Savage, we worked with him and his team in 2002 to start doing 3 3/4 convention sets. And over time, it became things like the FSS, which I consider like some of the hallmark of G.I. Joe design, especially for that era when we weren't getting a lot of things at mass retail, figures that never would have seen the light of day. And also the thing about the club items, they are the smallest run items, production items of G.I. Joe ever produced. A lot of people don't realize, you know, we may have made 20,000 of every G.I. Joe that went to retail. I'm just making numbers up. The club items are less than 10% of that. So compared to every G.I. Joe retail item, a club item, you know, there's one of those for every 10 of the other ones. They're so rare and they're awesome. So I really, really give the club a lot of credit for what they did. And the classified, so there's a funny story too. So in my last years at Hasbro, for the last 5 years I think I was there, I was let go in 2018, fall of 2018. For the last 5 years of the line, I had on my line plan every year a 6-inch Joe line. We presented like 6-inch G.I. Joe will recatalyze the brand. And our management team didn't believe it. They said, no, we just don't believe it's going to happen. We don't think that fans are going to be a big enough audience to really support the Joe brand based on a 6-inch launch. How wrong they were, but it took 5 years. Finally, we got the decision that, okay, you can launch a 6-inch Joe line with the next G.I. Joe movie. So even though we had really been pushing to try and get it as the thing that would recatalyze the Joe brand for a long time, it wasn't until the Snake Eyes movie got greenlit that the 6-inch Joe line was put into production. And so it was tied to that. And that's a very important thing because Hasbro management said, okay, here's a movie, we'll give you more resources. Now you can have the tooling dollars to do it. But they wouldn't do that before then. But that's all it took because once it was in production, I think the fans voted. However, it was not the easiest start for classified. The first waves of classified, the first wave was done when I was there. The brand had not been named classified. It was just G.I. Joe 6-inch by the time I got let go. But we did put it into research. Our management team did not believe that fans wanted to see updated versions of their favorite character, or just, larger size versions of their favorite 3 3/4 characters. They thought they wanted to see evolved versions of the figures. I disagreed. I said, the customer for this are going to be fans who grew up with the Real American Hero. 6-inch is a dominant scale for showing off detail, articulation, posability. It's just an awesome scale for expressing characters. I'm a Marvel Legends and DC 6-inch figure collector myself. So I said, people are dying to see this in 6-inch. But our management team said, we're not going to agree to that. What we'll do is put it into market research. So we did a focus group in Pawtucket, multiple focus groups with kids and with people who grew up with G.I. Joe, with the real American heroes. These are people drawn from the Pawtucket area, not necessarily collectors of Joe, just people who grew up with it. And we showed a range for every character, 6 different versions of, say, Roadblock. Okay, so you saw the first Roadblock that came out in Wave 1. We started out with just an updated version of an 84 version 2 Roadblock, right? 86.
84 is 186.
Yeah, 86. And then we went up to all this like sci-fi, laser blasting, toting Roadblock. And we put that into retail. Is Lenny here? Lenny's not in the room. Okay. So Lenny was part of the team too who launched it. He's here at the show today. And people told us, kids told us they liked the more extreme ones, like the space ones. And the people who grew up with G.I. Joe wanted to see an evolved G.I. Joe. But we didn't have like all the true fans in the room. So what we ended up doing was something that kind of satisfied everybody who was in our focus group, but ultimately pleased nobody who was a core fan, right? Who really liked the classic treatments of Joe. Within a year, that line was corrected. I was gone by then, but it was corrected based on your feedback. But that's how things work. Sometimes at Hasbro, it's like, you want to test things, and if you don't necessarily have the right test groups in there, you don't get the right result, right? If you don't trust who your target market is going to be, really test against that target market, you get results like we got for Wave 1. But luckily, the demand was so strong, you guys showed it, and they course corrected. Lenny and the team course corrected immediately and classified as what it is today because of that. So you guys are awesome because they got your feedback fast and they did something about it.
So I'd like to take a moment to thank Justin and Heritage Auctions for making this happen here. And
Where did you get that? That is in the archives of the old.
What?
So, and I had hair. That's Goggles, an old Kenner toy, the smoking goat, right?
I did this professionally.
Is that the smoking goat?
Don't worry about it.
Is there old toy people here? This is in the old archives. So Hasbro had like the old Play-Doh factory, and it just rose. So Indiana Jones belongs to the museum. That's the museum, and there's 3 of everything at least.
Yep. We got